Hello and welcome to this week's Why Football podcast with me, Etches Adoku, and Michael Dryden. How are you, Dryden?
I'm terrible, Etches. Absolutely dreadful. Basically, Sunderland have reached the lowest point in their long history. Officials from fan groups met with club officials yesterday, and there's assumption now between fans that they're effectively blaming fans, or the owner is blaming the fans for the failed sale, saying the unrest has not helped. We ended up finishing 8th, so we actually went down a place after the points became. It's just a dreadful time to be a Sunderland fan, man. So not seeing them play, not being able to go to games, seeing this on Twitter all the time, it's just depressing. Really is depressing. A few people have also been asking me about your actual age. A few questions. A few pods ago, I made what was a really funny joke about you being in your 40s.
Yeah.
You'd like to challenge that?
I'm actually 26 years of age.
Recently turned 26 as
well. June 17th, 1994.
Cool. Yeah. Just thought we'd clear that one up. And how are you, Edge?
Yeah, I'm good. FA Cup semi-final today. The Arsenal are playing Man City. I reckon it'll go one of two ways. Either we'll win 2-1 or lose 7-0. I don't think there's much of an
I've got a feeling it might go one of one ways.
Yeah, it might be 7-0.
One of one way, which will probably be a defeat. City have been pretty good since the restart.
They have been indeed. Apart from that, I had a few friends. So I've missed some of the Arsenal games during the week. So I've been busy in the evenings. And one of my friends, Shane Beck, has been questioning my Arsenal loyalty.
Really?
Yeah, so he actually is a Liverpool fan.
Born and raised, isn't he?
Born and raised in Liverpool. He's also a bit of plastic, to be honest. But yeah, he's been questioning my Arsenal loyalty. So I've been fighting that corner this week as well. A break from FIFA.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We've heard a lot about your pro clubs.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about my pro clubs. I've moved on to COD Zombies.
Really?
With my flatmates, which has been good. Frustrating.
So you went from being a 40-year-old down to a 15-year-old very quickly there.
Correct. And also, there's one more thing I have to highlight as well is last week on the pod, Dryden was referencing a new player I haven't actually heard of in Serie A from days gone by the name of Milico.
Very niche player. I think he played for Bologna, I think.
So at the time, when I was listening, I was like, who's he talking about?
I'm not sure I knew who I was talking about.
So it's a fusion of Fabrizio Micheli or Milito.
I meant Fabrizio Micheli, so I was referring to my old Ultimate Team, which is a Serie A Ultimate Team, which had Antonio Di Natale, Micheli, as we've not and Alexander Pato in that little 3 at the top.
And I'm glad he cleared that up.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up.
This week, Dryden will be taking a look back at Croatia's 2018 World Cup, football in the country and how such a tiny nation produced World Cup finalists. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at yfootball_ for our latest content. Please also follow and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and new this week, Acast.
No, it's exciting.
For immediate access to our future episodes. It is exciting, isn't it?
Very much so.
So, Dryden, tell me about football in Croatia. Has the country always been a successful footballing side?
Well, football in Croatia is actually referred to as nogomet.
Okay.
Not to be confused with perisic. We went to Croatia with friends.
Yeah.
And this is a ball sport. We play in shallow waters.
Yeah.
Basically, the person who, it's like one bounce in football. The person who can't keep the ball up loses.
I was the reigning champion.
You did win.
Well.
I don't think I won a single one, to be fair. The one-on-ones at the end are just too difficult.
Yeah. You struggled.
So Croatia is a small nation, as most will be aware. They have a population of just less than 4.1 million, which is the same as Mauritania and Kuwait, for reference. They're led by the Croatian Football Federation, which was founded in 1912. After World War I, the Croatians played a major part in the founding of the first football federation for the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, later named the Football Association of Yugoslavia. After the Second World War, most of the prominent Yugoslavian clubs, including clubs in Croatia, were dissolved and replaced with new sides by Marshal Tito's communist regime. The communist regime in the new state quickly moved to ban all clubs who had either participated in the Croatian Championship or bore Croatian national names. Most clubs had to maintain loyalty to the regime, so that's why you may see a lot of clubs with a communist red star as part of their emblem still, or they did at that time. After Croatia gained independence in the 90s, the Football Federation was reconstituted. Yugoslavia don't have a particularly glittered past, So they've actually only won silver at 2 Olympics, 1948 and 1952. They did actually win the 1987 FIFA World Youth Championship. Many Croatian internationals were part of that, spoiling the golden generation. It won 3rd place at the 98 FIFA World Cup, which I'll come on to. A third of that squad was Croatian, including Davor Suker, former Real Madrid and Arsenal, Zvonimir Boban, former Milan player, and tournament top scorer Robert Prosinecki, ex-Real Madrid, Barca and Portsmouth. Why do I keep choosing topics that have players that are going to be difficult to pronounce?
Yeah, you always end up sweating throughout the record
I'm sweating now. So following that youth team success actually came the dissolution of Yugoslavia. The team was split up and the remaining team of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was actually banned from competing at Euro 92. The place was actually taken by Denmark, who went on to win the competition, interestingly. Croatia have appeared in 5 World Cups, achieving 3rd place in 1998 and 2nd place in 2018. And they've appeared in 5 Euros, reaching the quarterfinals in 96 and 2008.
Thanks for that, Jeeves. The quarterfinal loss against Portugal in the last Euros was honestly daylight robbery. You know, they dominated from start to finish and actually had 17 shots, but 0 on target.
Good.
Yeah, I think Vida, you know, the guy, the blonde-haired centre-back with the suspect haircut, he hit the bar from a header, I think, and Quaresma got the winning goal, nicking it for Portugal to go through. Speaking of haircuts, Perisic... So he had like a short back and sides in that tournament, but the sides was actually like dyed in the Croatia flag. It was honestly...
Yeah, it was like when Asamoah Gyan had the 3 put into his hair. And who can forget Goran Pandev? Is it Goran Pandev with the bit of the back just hanging down?
Yeah, we should do a pod on football's worst haircuts. But yeah, it wasn't great. What's their domestic league like? Are there still issues of corruption in Croatia?
So Croatia's domestic league consists of 3 national leagues at professional level, the Croatian Cup and the Croatian Super Cup. The first division, the Prva HNL, was founded in 1992 and consists of 10 teams. The winners and second place enter the qualifying stages of the Champions League. Only 5 times in history have teams from the first division enter the group stages of the Champions League after the qualification stage. In the 94-95 season, Hajduk Split eliminated Legia Warsaw in the qualifying round and entered the group stage. They advanced to the quarterfinals as group runners-up behind Benfica, but were eliminated by eventual winners Ajax. Today, club football in Croatia is dominated by Hajduk Split, HNK Rijeka, and largely Dynamo Zagreb. Zagreb are the most successful club with 20 titles overall. They are followed by Hajduk Split with 6 titles. Rijeka and NK Zagreb have each won 1 title.
I mean, that's almost complete domination from Dynamo Zagreb. It's almost to the point where domestic success, I assume, isn't enough for it to be a fantastic season for them because they're so dominant. I would assume, you know, long runs in Europe, if they qualify the Europa League or Champions League, is probably their marker of a great season, much like Celtic in Scotland or PSG in France, although PSG is more about they actually have to win the Champions League, not just get far in it. Yeah,
there seems to be a complete monopoly, which I'll go on to touch on in terms of the youth system with Dynamo. In terms of the corruption, Zdravko Mamach, considered the most powerful figure in Croatian football at the time, was found guilty on a set of charges that includes making illegal personal profits on player transfers from Dynamo Zagreb. The court ruled that players in question, namely Luka Modric and Dejan Lovren, were unlawfully paid 50% of the transfer fees that Dynamo received, only to then forward that money to Mamach, who was the Dynamo executive at the time, or a executive at that time, and his family. Mamach signed personal contracts with many players during their early development years, such as Modric and Lovren and Kovacic, now at Chelsea, and Vršalko, I believe I pronounced that right. They all had similar contracts with Mamach, but Andrej Kramaric, former Leicester player, actually refused his influence. Modric was charged with perjury, but this was later rejected by the Croatian court. I'm not sure if the rejection was based on any legal terms, but if I was a judge and, you know, we got to the final of the World Cup and Jordan Henderson was, embroiled in scandal, I'd probably let him off.
Yeah.
Would you?
You'd be lenient. Yeah, maybe. Rochalko used to always get unreal.
Yeah, is it
on Football Manager.
Sassuolo? Is that Sassuolo?
Yeah, he used to be at Genoa.
Okay.
Yeah, he used to be at Genoa. Or maybe he was there before, but he was at Genoa. And he just used to get so good on the game and always end up at Barca or City with the values of like 60 million on his head.
Yeah.
He still had a great career, but yeah, he used to be.
It's always a problem
unreal.
position. I've signed Hakimi, and a lot of my friends have as well, because it's a problem position.
Oh, really? Mamach actually isn't imprisoned for his crimes. He was sentenced, but has fled to Bosnia, who have refused to extradite him because he's a national. So he's just
but he was sentenced to 6 years as well. And there's a rule in Croatia where a sentence of over 5 years is just immediately. So there's no bail process.
Oh, really?
Just go to jail. So obviously he fled to Bosnia. He's got dual nationality. Yeah.
What was Croatia's route to the 2018 final, and how did they line up?
So actually, before the tournament, a panicked Croatia changed coach on the eve of a crunch qualifier in October 2017. And actually, in Russia, they sent Nikola Kalinic home after he refused to come off the bench in their opening game against Nigeria.
Yeah, I remember the Nigeria game well. Croatia were a class apart in that affair. Players refusing to come off the bench is just such a bad move.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's just never going to end well. I recall watching Premier League years, which I've seen countless times, especially the 98 one, 2002 one, and 2004 one.
Why is that?
Arsenal in the league in those years. And I recall Pierre Van Hooijdonk had an issue at Nottingham Forest where he has promised the team would strengthen, and they didn't, and key players were sold, and his transfer request was rejected, so he just went on strike. Like, how can one of your best players just go on strike? He didn't play for months. I just find that's bonkers.
It's like Timo Pukki.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bad example of just being relegated, but it's just literally like your main striker. Like Danny Ings.
Yeah.
Scoring goals for Southampton.
Besides,
I don't fancy him.
Yeah.
So Croatia were managed by Zlatko Dalic, a former international player who played most of his career in Yugoslavia and Croatia. Croatia topped Group D, beating Argentina, Nigeria and Iceland, dispatched Argentina 3-0. Goals from Rebic, Modric and Rakitic. Their mostly used lineup, so we take into the knockout stages, against Denmark, England and France, they lined up with the same team. So it's always a 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 with the three midfield players in there. And it usually consisted of Vida and Lovman at the back, as you mentioned, Strinic left back, Vrzelko at right wing back, Subasic, who had a really good tournament. Modric, obviously, who won player of the tournament and winning the Ballon d'Or. Then Perisic, Rebic and Mandzukic leading the attack. Mandzukic sinking England's hearts, as everyone will be aware. Modric, I believe, sought with Rakitic at times on the pitch. One of the two went forward. Brozovic tends to hold a bit more. Kramaric came in for one of them games against Russia ahead of Brozovic. He actually scored the goal. So in the round of 16, they defeated Eriksen's Denmark on penalties despite going 1-0 down in the first minute, but equalised 3 minutes later through Mario Mandzukic. The ball hit Christensen square in the face for landing at Mandzukic and just netted it. Rakitic went on to score the winning pen in that shootout. In the quarterfinals, Rakitic did the same thing, scored the winning penalty in the shootout. But again, they went down 1-0 and equalised shortly after through a Kramaric header. Vida scored after extra time, but it was cancelled out by Mario Fernandes. And then it went to penalties. In the semi-finals, we all know what happened in the semi-finals, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. England took the lead through a Trippier free kick. Subasic should have saved it, in my opinion. I mean, it was brilliant.
The only time the world stood still.
Thanks, Etches. And then, obviously, we know Perisic equalised in the 60th minute with a clever flick. I mean, it's one of them goals where, like, how's he got the power on the ball? Yeah. And, like, it's such a clever finish, man. Like, he had an excellent tournament, and it was just devastating, man. I think he got ahead of Walker and flicked it, and it was absolutely devastating. Modric continued to dominate a tied England throughout that game. I mean, the second half of extra time was still just dominating the game. Like, incredible performance from him and throughout the tournament. In the final, Croatia played very well in the first half and throughout the game, and were unlucky to go into half-time 2-1 down. France took the lead for an unfortunate Mandzukic own goal, before another clever finish by Perisic even the scoring. Griezmann penalty put France ahead, so they're 2-1 down thanks to an own goal and a penalty. 2-1 down. Croatia began to tire in the second half with France's quality shining through. Pogba and Mbappe secured the win. Mandzukic grabbed a consolation and became the only player to ever score an own goal and a goal in the World Cup final. And they were the smallest finalist since Uruguay in 1950. Interesting fact.
Very interesting indeed. It's a good point you mentioned about population size, and I wonder how much it actually affects football. So if you look at New Zealand in rugby, it highlights how having so few people in one nation doesn't mean you can't dominate a sport. Obviously, they're not comparable because a lot more countries play football, but New Zealand has a tiny population compared to South Africa, yet their team dominates in that arena. I really liked Rebic in that tournament for Croatia. He's one of the few players I'd never heard of, and he kind of popped up and then someone I've followed since. I think he's now at Eintracht Frankfurt.
I think he's popped up.
He was at Milan. I think he's now at Eintracht Frankfurt. I can't remember. But yeah, that shout out to him as well. And also big shout out to Luka Modric for the tournament that he had, obviously winning the Ballon d'Or.
Your dad's a Tottenham fan, isn't he?
He is a Tottenham fan.
Just a shout out there.
He is a Tottenham fan indeed. We'll leave that one to the side. But Luka Modric was actually voted La Liga's worst signing in 2012, just after his move from Spurs. An accolade now that would surely raise a few eyebrows.
Yeah, absolutely. He's went on to have an absolutely fantastic career at Real. I mean, he's won everything.
Yeah.
He's won titles. He's won the Champions League, 4 occasions?
Yep.
He hasn't won the World Cup, obviously, but I mean, even getting to the final. If England had got to the final, I know it's easy to say that in hindsight, or say this in hindsight, but I think I just would have been over the moon. Like, I think it would have been devastating to then go on to lose to France, which most likely would have happened.
Yeah.
But just being a final in our lifetime would have been brilliant. So it was absolutely heartbreaking. I watched that in Turin, in Italy, for a festival. And I remember being in so everyone had left. So the quarter-final was during the festival.
Yeah.
And so there was loads of English fans there, loads of English fans in the pub. We stayed afterwards for like a break after. And the semi-final was all English fans who went home. So we watched it in a bar, and there was one Croatian, there was one Italian guy who was a West Ham fan, didn't speak any English, and he was just throwing abuse at the Croatian fans.
So how does Croatia produce such talented players?
So in Croatia, sport has largely become a matter of national identity over the years. Croatia's first president, Franjo Tuđman, after the '98 third place team, said, "Now the world will see us differently and talk about Croatia in a more brighter tone." So it really is a big deal for what was a fledgling nation at the time. Slaven Bilic actually followed the 18 final, commented on it saying it's impossible to have a great domestic league with 150 good players because obviously they've got 10 teams in their first division. They do obviously have the talent and character, but a major point he touched on is that for the players in Croatia, when they are 17 or 18, they're getting their chance. It's this argument of in the Premier League, players aren't getting a chance at that level because the stakes are so high. Every game is so massive because obviously the cost of relegation is so high. The cost of not getting to Champions League is so high. So they're playing week in, week out. And I think it's the same in Brazil. Like, they come through at such a young age. It's not as if these leagues aren't competitive and aren't taken seriously. It's a massive deal in Croatia, and it is in Brazil. And they've got stadiums. In Brazil, got big stadiums where they're playing in front of loads of fans in really pressurized environments. And it really seems to build this, not just the player in terms of technical ability, but the character as well. So in 2011, the Dynamo Zagreb Academy was awarded one of the 6 best youth academies in Europe by Uefa, alongside Barcelona, Inter Milan, Sporting Lisbon, Ajax, and Arsenal. Were the other winners of that. The academy continues to churn out talent. They now hold the world record for a single club to be represented at a World Cup, with 14 players in the Croatian 18 World Cup squad. Our Croatia only has 5 pitches that meet UEFA's international standards. Obviously, they have numerous pitches, but only 5 that actually can be used internationally. So the infrastructure is largely poor, and the investment in grassroots football is basically non-existent unless, seemingly, you are Dynamo Zagreb, which seems to have a dynasty. Hajduk Split are also a famed academy. Slaven Bilic came through there. Modric spent some time there. Typically, kids come from the street, and if football provides a sense of purpose, it seems, in the nation. So it was a nation that was torn by war and unrest, and so I think for a time it became a bit of escapism for families and for children to get into playing sport, which again could be akin to, say, Brazil, which isn't war torn, but kids learn on the street and then come into these academy systems. Talented players are also forced to leave their clubs early because of bad financial situation for a lot of Croatian clubs, picking up fees from other domestic teams like Dynamo Zagreb, or going abroad into Europe or further afield to play. In order to obtain a proper UEFA coaching license in Croatia too, you had to be a professional footballer, and having international caps is a must if you want to reach the final stages of your coaching education, which narrows the pool in a country that is already small and desperate for quality coaching.
Yeah, the UEFA coaching license thing is quite narrow-minded, I think, especially in a world where we have Jose Mourinho, Maurizio Sarri, and Andre Villas-Boas, who have all had hugely successful careers despite never playing the game at a professional level.
Yeah,
you
that's a
know,
good point.
I think, especially Mourinho, is one of the most successful managers of all time.
Yeah.
So for a country that's so desperate to have coaches, it seems pretty stupid that they have that rule in place.
Definitely.
Having said that, though, I think the world of football is beginning to change, where that opinion, which is kind of if you haven't played the game, you can't coach, is moving to more of an open-minded view. Spurs assistant manager João Sacramento is a good example of that. He studied, I think, football studies in Scotland, and then has now found himself next to, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most influential or one of the most successful managers in the game currently.
Well, look at Graham Potter as well.
Exactly.
I mean, he studied in England and went to Norway. Was it?
I think
Osterund?
I think Graham Potter played football though.
Oh, did he? Well, professional level. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, well. So I think a really interesting discussion point from this is, are we likely to see another small nation reach the World Cup or Euro finals, or say like a poorer nation, less affluent? Say Portugal is small, but obviously they reached the Euro 2016 final. But they obviously have got rich footballing history. Richer countries are producing talent at an unprecedented rate. Big clubs have excellent facilities. They're stockpiling players, particularly in England. Holland and Belgium are small nations, but like Portugal, are far more affluent and have a much closer proximity to Western Europe. Semi-finals in 2014 had Brazil, Argentina, Holland and Germany. These semi-finals in 2010, so in the World Cups, Uruguay, Spain, Germany and Netherlands. So similar. Basically, the big guys seem to be in there, bar say Uruguay.
Yeah, it depends what you define as a small nation, as I touched on earlier. In theory, a smaller population means you have a smaller pool to choose from, but it depends also on the main sports of that nation. So if you look at China, India and US, they don't have dominant football sides at all because US focus on their American sports, India with cricket, China with maybe gymnastics and other focuses.
Olympic sports.
Olympic sports, yeah. So I think it's hard to actually measure what we define as a small,
absolutely,
as a small nation. Population-wise, yes, Uruguay as well as Croatia is very impressive, but they're also countries where football is their main sport. If I was to look at the player pool of their small population compared to, I reckon the US is a good example potentially because there's so many sports. Maybe it's actually similar in terms of application. I don't know.
Absolutely, in terms of participation.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to say. I think on your point of when could a smaller side, in terms of population anyway, win a tournament, I think Norway with Haaland, who's going from strength to strength. Austria with David Alaba. What's his name? The West Ham striker who's left. What's his name?
Arnautovic. They've got a good side. They've got who's got playing for Leipzig?
Sabitzer.
Yeah.
They got Sabitzer in midfield as well, and Lehmer, also Austrian, Konrad Lehmer. So yeah, I think those two countries in particular have fairly small populations, but could definitely win a Euros.
Yeah.
A World Cup is a lot harder once you had the African nations who can cause upsets.
South American nations,
South America in particular, who are powerhouses. But you never know. I wouldn't say Croatia were favourites to reach the final, although they did have a very good team. So anything's possible.
Because only 6 or 7 teams have actually won the World Cup. Because if you think about it, there hasn't actually been that many World Cups.
No.
So it obviously comes around so infrequently, and then you've got to get all the way to the final and then defeat a team like France. And also the path, I think one thing we haven't necessarily touched on as such is the path to the final. So as you know, it's talked about a lot at the time how England seemingly had this really easy path to the semi-final compared to like France and Belgium, who, that's France beat Belgium, Brazil on the way to getting to the final. So that's not touched on, but I think Croatia's achievement is still absolutely fantastic, really.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Unprecedented, really.
And I think the other issue we mentioned a little bit as well of stockpiling talent is representation. You know, Ireland are a really good example, who have a very similar size population to Croatia, but struggle massively with their ties to England.
Yeah.
You know, you look at Jack Grealish and Declan Rice, two players that represented their youth teams, and actually I think played in their Declan Rice definitely played for the first team, but it was a friendly.
Yeah.
Grealish under 21s, and they've switched allegiances.
I know happens
like,
very often.
Exactly. And then someone like Croatia wouldn't necessarily struggle, but there are a lot of small nations that suffer from that dual nationality issue in football. But I think that is a pod for another day.
Absolutely.
That's all from us. Thank you to Dryden for doing the research and for pronouncing some of the more tougher names out there.
Thank you.
You did really, really well.
Thank
you
you.
can take a deep breath and have a biscuit.
Oh, will do.
No worries. And thank you for tuning into this week's Why Football podcast. Please don't forget to follow us at @WhyFootball_, and please also follow and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and new this week, I've said it twice now, Acast, for immediate access to our future episodes. Cheers, guys, and see you next week.
Thank you very much. Cheers.